Hello everybody and welcome. In this short presentation, I want to bring you through the types of questions that will be on the SEC examination paper for Junior Cycle Science. And throughout this presentation, I'll be referring to various pages in the Folens Smart Study Junior Cycle Science Revision and Exam Guide. Now, the suggested answers to all of the questions on the SEC sample paper are given in the Smart Study Science book there on pages 232 to 260. So you may wish to refer to these questions from time to time, and in particular the model answers that are given with them. So what types of questions will appear on the SEC exam paper? There are a number of different categories. The first category is where you're simply asked to label parts of diagrams. As you can see there, labeling parts of the microscope, labeling parts of cells, and so on. The second type of question that you're asked is where you're asked to complete tables. As you can see on the screen there, you were asked to give information about the units of various quantities. You could also be asked about simple processes, names. So make sure you understand the meaning of all of those terms like combustion and respiration and photosynthesis, for example. In completing tables, you can also be asked to fill in simple words, or as you can see in the second part of the question, to write simple chemical formulae of different compounds. In completing tables, you could be asked about energy changes, as you can see there in a solar panel. What is the energy conversion that takes place, and what's the main loss of energy? In addition to completing tables, you can also be asked about interpreting and drawing graphs. And this is the third major category, and a very important category, because you can always expect to be asked questions about drawing and interpreting graphs. So for example, in the SEC sample paper, they asked you about solubility curves. They also asked you about plotting a graph of current versus voltage. Note that the graph is drawn in blue in order to be picked up in the scanning process. Don't draw the graph in pencil, because if the pencil is very faint, it may not be picked up when your examination paper is scanned. You will also be asked to interpret graphs. So for example, in that question, and the model answer is on page 249 of Smart Study Science, you'll see they gave you some information on a graph, and they asked you to deduce certain information from the graph given to you. In addition to interpreting data on a graph, you will also, of course, be asked to draw graphs given data. And there you were given some data, you can see on the table there on the screen, measuring the rate of reaction of an experiment in which a gas is given off. You were given the data in the form of a table, and you were asked then to draw the graph to summarize the data on the table. And as you can see, the steeper curve is for the reaction at 30 degrees centigrade. So you can see the rate of that reaction is faster than the rate of the reaction at 20 degrees centigrade. And you were asked to draw various conclusions as a result. So graphs are very, very important. So make sure you know graphs inside out. The fourth type of question that's asked by the SEC involves key terms, filling in the blanks there with the correct words, and also, for example, knowing what an endothermic reaction is, knowing the meaning of exothermic reaction, and being able to explain what each of these types of reactions are. So make sure you understand the key terms as you go through your revision. Likewise, identifying particular items like a pitfall trap and a pooter that were used in carrying out a habitat study. Similarly, identifying parts of a circuit diagram like voltmeter and ammeter as shown on the screen. And similarly, make sure you know your definitions. That was an interesting question. What's the difference between a moon and a planet? So give the definition of a moon, give the definition of a planet, and carry on to the next question. Interpreting drawings may come up from time to time. This was an interesting question that was given on the State Examinations Commission sample examination paper. And as you can see, they asked you to distinguish between a solid, liquid and gas, and also asked you to distinguish between an element, compound and mixture. And if you look at the Smart Study Science revision book, what we have done there is we have summarized all the possible type of questions that you could be asked in this area of interpreting simple diagrams, all based, of course, on the particle theory of matter. So I would certainly advise you to study page 91 of Smart Study Science and make sure you understand what each of these diagrams is telling you. Then we have multiple choice questions. As mentioned in the first part of this video, try to block out all of the answers until you figure out yourself in your own mind what the correct answer is. The answer simply involves ticking a box, but make sure you tick the right box. And useful information for answering multiple choice questions was given in the first part of this talk. The next heading is the nature of science. It's one of the strands on the junior cycle science syllabus, and usually it's examined by asking you to read a short little account and answer questions that arose from the text. Number 8, very important, describing how to carry out laboratory practical work. From my days of marking junior cycle examination papers, the most common mistake made by students is that they do not write enough. So here you are asked to describe how to make up a solution of 5 grams of citric acid in 100 mils of water. And about 2/3 of the page were left blank. So you're expected to write step by step by step of what is involved in making up that solution, and also to draw labeled diagrams of all of the apparatus used. So whenever you're describing an experiment, make absolutely sure that you describe it in as much detail as possible, and also that you use labeled diagrams. Because even if you forget a point when writing the experiment, if you have a labeled diagram included, you could still get the marks. Similarly, investigating how pH changes during a reaction, try to remember all the steps that you went through when carrying out that particular experiment. Likewise, in the SEC sample paper, they asked you about comparing the heat energy produced by a filament lamp and a CFL lamp. And again, notice we have 7 distinct steps involved. Another experiment they asked on the SEC sample paper was how to use a quadrat. And again, write down the steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in this case that are involved in carrying out this particular investigation. Another experiment that they could ask for was about a factor affecting photosynthesis. Not the rate of photosynthesis, but just a factor affecting photosynthesis. And so you describe how to do the experiment and make sure you include a labelled diagram. And if you look at the labelled diagram on the screen, notice how detailed it is. So pay very careful attention to drawing labelled diagrams. These diagrams were of course drawn by a professional artist. You don't even have to come up to that standard, but what you do have to do is make sure you label it. Likewise, in the Earth and Space strand, they asked you to label the diagrams as shown on the screen. And when describing how to carry out laboratory practical work, in yet another question, they asked you to draw a labelled diagram. So time and time again, they ask you to describe experiments in detail and draw labelled diagrams. The ninth topic that you could be asked about are explaining topics, explaining various concepts rather on the SEC paper to show that you understand why, for example, it's important to improve the energy efficiency of household devices. And look at the model answer that we have there on page 247 and note the detail that is required. Likewise, stating advantages of using solar energy rather than nuclear energy during space exploration. The 10th category on the state examinations paper are various calculations. You could, for example, get calculations involving power. So watts equal to volts by amps. So make sure you remember key equations. Or you could be asked, for example, calculating percentage frequencies from an ecology study. Or you could be asked, for example, to carry out calculations involving density. So make sure that you are well prepared and that you get plenty of practice in answering these types of questions. And the 11th category then is the analysis of data, where you'll be given a table of data and you'll have to make various deductions from it. And there they said, explain why Jupiter is described as a gas giant. And there they asked you to compare densities from Jupiter and Earth and draw a conclusion in order to answer that question. And you can see the model answer there on the screen. Likewise, they gave diagrams. Now, in the sample paper, they used things called Sankey diagrams. And Sankey diagrams are not on the syllabus or specification. But all you were expected to do was to deduce the information from the Sankey diagram. You weren't expected to know anything at all about Sankey diagrams, but the deduction of information is a very important process for you. So in conclusion, therefore, you have a wide variety of questions on the paper. They'll be testing your knowledge, like your understanding of key terms. They'll be testing your understanding in terms of your ability to explain concepts in science, your application, like in drawing graphs, and your analysis, like in interpreting data, presented in the form of a graph or in a table. So my one piece of advice is make sure you get plenty of practice in answering all of these different types of questions. And I wish you all every success in your examination and in your revision for the examination. So, best of luck.